Desert is brought to you in part by GAP, supporter of programs that address the issues you care about, and by Brita, maker of Brita water filtration systems. Brita makes tap water taste the way nature intended. Like you. Major funding also provided by the Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, with additional funding from these organizations.
This river, the Colorado, can be turned on and turned off, down to the last drop, on order of the Interior Secretary of the United States. This was the first river on Earth to come under complete human control. The only river in 1,000 miles of desert so hot and dry that men have died from thirst within sight of its banks. Today, 30 million people depend on the waters of the Colorado. This is the story of how that came to be.
Las Vegas isn't supposed to be here. No one dreamed there would ever be a Las Vegas on the Colorado River. That in this stark, barren desert, people would actually want to live and develop a community and build a city in it.
People don't come to Las Vegas because they've carefully analyzed our water supply. They come here because the economic potential is there. We have the jobs, and we keep building mega resorts on the Strip. I mean, one hotel is 10,000 jobs. And we have a vibrant economy. We pay no taxes. Gaming is footing the bill for us. And we found paradise.
You're going to notice a lot of swimming pools as we fly along. I like to think it's out of self-defense. We occasionally have temperatures out here, 120, 125 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of gated communities and lake communities seem to be the fashion here in the last few years. You're also going to be noticing a lot of new homes under construction. There is now and has been a housing boom going on here in the valley for about the last 6 or 7 years.
Las Vegas is only one of a dozen cities feeding on the Colorado. Here it rains 3 inches a year, about the same as in Egypt. Every week, 1,000 people move to Las Vegas, and each of them will use 350 gallons of cool, clear water every day.
Why are you in the desert? You shouldn't even be in the desert. If you people would just send everybody away, you wouldn't have this problem. If you'd like this kind of growth in your community, have at it. All these people have to go somewhere in this country.
The Colorado River is the lifeblood of the Southwest. Without the Colorado, without a stable water supply, the Southwest would not look anything like it does.
Without water, without flowing water, all these desert places that we have settled and made populous are really, really unbearable environments.
It all began in 1857, when Joseph Christmas Ives ran a steamboat up to the desolate spot where Las Vegas now stands. Stopped by rapids, he said, "The Colorado River shall be forever unvisited and undisturbed," and turned back. But in 1869, John Wesley Powell set off down the mysterious river. His was the last great scientific expedition inside the United States, entering the last part of the West unpenetrated by whites. The river Powell explored was wild and muddy.
Well, you have to give him credit. One arm going down that river, didn't know a thing about it. They had no idea whether they'd find waterfalls, the kind of rapids they'd run into. And I remember the first time I went down, I had to worry about whether that roar I heard in the distance was a waterfall of 100 feet or just a little rapid.
We now administer the Colorado in a great system of waterworks, but in a few places, it sometimes runs wild, as Powell found it. Powell was a keen, skeptical observer, determined to learn whether Americans could realistically settle the land along the Colorado. Fed by snowmelt and rare violent storms, it was America's siltiest river and one of the world's warmest. No river on Earth had cut such canyons.
The river was tempestuous, willful, headstrong. It would flow at the flow of the Mississippi at low water in a little canyon, really. I mean, the Grand Canyon is huge, but the actual river bed is small. And this river would rise 70 feet.
It ran wild for 2 or 3 months every year, and it would get down to a trickle in August and September. The fluctuations on the Colorado River is amazing. It's just not a very predictable river.
It was an outlaw river, and we couldn't let it not be regulated. And that's why I think it wasn't just that it was the only significant river in the Southwest, but that it was so willful. This nature that we say we love wild, we really like it quite well regulated. And we went after the Colorado River with a kind of a special vengeance.
Powell questioned whether the river could be controlled, whether it could water the arid West, and whether it could be fairly divided. Americans have bitterly debated the Colorado ever since. This year, Reclamation Commissioner Dan Beard is running the river with 30 people, all of whom lay some claim to its waters.
Who wants this river? Everyone wants this river. Everyone in the southwestern United States and northwestern Mexico. You know, as you flow down here, it's hard to realize, but this river is really supplying Phoenix, Tucson, a substantial amount of the water supply for Southern California, Southern Nevada, provides substantial habitat for all kinds of aquatic life. There's a lot of people competing for this river.
When I was born in 1912, there were no dams in the Colorado River. It was a wild river all from start to finish. They thought it was all right, I think, for rivers to run to the ocean. That was their idea, and it was probably a good one.
There was a cry practically nationwide to control the wild, raging, rampant Colorado River that flooded the Yuma Valley and all the irrigation land down there. Flooded it every year, without question. There needed to be some control structure on the Colorado to stop those devastating annual floods.
For all its glory, the Colorado was a small river, only 1/30th the flow of the Mississippi, but it was the biggest river in 1,000 miles of desert. In 1922, Herbert Hoover convened Western states to divide the river's water. Half was claimed by the mountain states, where the rain and snow fell, and half by the desert states, where most of the farms and cities would be. Never would such a river be asked to do so much. But the compact reserved no water for Native Americans and little for Mexico. Within a year, Bureau of Reclamation surveyors had located dozens of dam sites. The prime dam site was in a remote canyon called Glen. But the Bureau, under fierce pressure from California congressmen, chose instead the narrows of Black Canyon, 300 miles closer to the exploding population of Los Angeles. The first great dam would be here, a few miles from the tiny village of Las Vegas.
Hoover Dam, to me, was a spectacle that unbelievable that man could build it to start with.
No dam that size could be built. People didn't know how to do it, who would pay for it. It was a huge leap into the realm of the unknown.
No one had ever before stopped a river of this size. Hoover Dam would stop floods, irrigate farms, generate low-cost power for homes and factories. It would be bigger than the Great Pyramid of Egypt, 3 times as tall as the Statue of Liberty.
This was a depression like you never saw. And I felt very fortunate that I could come to Boulder City and go to work on Hoover Boulder Dam, whichever one you prefer to call it.
Work started here in 1931, and the dam was dedicated on September the 30th of 1935 by Franklin Roosevelt. What did it do with the water in the Colorado River? Well, the engineers of the United States Bureau of Reclamation who designed this dam had worked out the solution to simply bypass the entire Colorado River around to the canyon wall.
Of course, the first thing you have to do is get the river out of your way. We made tunnels through the rock. One of the critical times comes when we finally have to get that monstrous river into our tunnels. Get it out of our way so we can get down to bedrock and start the construction of a dam. And the river is not very anxious to change its channel. As you gradually squeeze it down, you can throw the Taj Mahal in there and the river moves it on downriver.
And what a thrill it was when that water gushed through those big diversion tunnels.
And we went down through the desert to an overlook, and we could see it being constructed. My father had me up on his shoulders looking out because we were looking down over that, and it was just terrifying but fascinating. It looked like a bunch of little ants, 1,000,000 little ants running down there, and the huge trucks. Why, they were so tiny.
The high scalers, they got $5 a day. If they had guts enough to wrestle a jackhammer up there, $5.60. So when a shot would go off up there, of course, the high scalers were cleared out of that particular area where the shot was going to go. Now, just to see these high scalers work off a bosun chair attached to a rope, some of those guys could spring around like monkeys.
And the basket that was being lowered down into the canyon, oh, I wanted to get on that so bad and ride down. It just looked like a barrel of fun.
We just changed shifts, and I heard the swish-swash of an air hose. Here he comes, tumbling, 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 tumbling. He looked like a little ant from way up there, and he lit quite close to where I was standing, and I made a mad dash over to this guy. There's nothing anybody could do, but along come a hard-boiled superintendent. Trucks were backing up. He said to me, "What are you gonna do with all these blankety-blank trucks?" I said, "There's a man killed over here. We'll get him moving. This guy can't hurt anybody." Keeping those trucks moving was more important than anything. You know, we got to get this dam built. I just bring that out as to how highball this job was.
It was on June 6, 1933, that the first bucket of concrete was placed in the very lowest of the dam forms, 135 feet below the level where a few months previously had flowed the unchallenged Colorado River. As bucket after bucket of concrete was dumped into the forms, the plan of the structure became apparent.
Getting that concrete down into that narrow canyon and the 120-degree heat, and I just marveled that man was able to do a thing like that.
The average high temperature was 119 degrees, 140 in the tunnels. In the first month, heat stroke killed a worker every 2 days.
They've got 3,250,000 cubic yards of concrete in there in only 2 years, and that's enough concrete to build a highway all the way from San Francisco to New York City.
It had much, 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 much more concrete in it than the Empire State Building. I mean, dozens of times more. It was solid, except for some corridors inside it, some elevators. It's absolutely solid.
It's 726 feet high, 660 feet thick at the bottom. It's only about 45 feet thick at the top. The best way from up here I've found to help everybody judge size is if you look at the vehicles driving back and forth across the top of it. If you happen to see any 18-wheel trucks, tour buses, or motor homes as we're going by, you'll notice they don't even appear large enough to be children's toys.
The big turbines, they fascinated me. I could hear them whirring, and they were so big. And my father and mother said, the water's coming in, it's making electricity. Power, that's what I feel down in the dam. I feel it. The dam itself is a powerful structure. God, look what it's holding back.
Imagine what a reservoir the size of Lake Mead weighs. Imagine the weight. And all that weight wants to go downriver. It doesn't have any other passion but to go downriver. And the only thing stopping it is this thumbnail, this 700-foot thumbnail.
As I stood on that transformer deck and looked at that magnificent concrete structure, I couldn't help but thinking that here is something greater than the pyramids, it's greater than the Sphinx, because it's not a monument to the dead. This is a monument to the living.
The dam is alive, and I know it gives life.
I had to stop and throw open the doors. Wow, look at that!
Even a dam hater has to admire.
I was tremendously impressed by that dam. When I first laid eyes on it, I felt like I had to get out of my car and kneel down and genuflect. Those engineers had built something not just immense, but really beautiful.
$53 million Boulder Dam, highest in the world, is practically finished. All but a few of the remaining workers get their final paychecks from the stupendous...
They topped it out in 1935, under budget and ahead of schedule, in the depths of a great drought and the Great Depression. Hoover Dam held back 2 years of the Colorado's flow in a 100-mile reservoir so heavy it bent the Earth's crust, creating its own tiny earthquakes.
In the name of the people of the United States, to whom you, Boulder Dam, are a symbol of greater things in the future, and in the honored presence of guests from many nations, I call you to life.
Hoover was the greatest single source of electricity in the world. Its turbines would power the aircraft industry that helped defeat Hitler, would light up downtown Los Angeles and 100 other cities. Its water would irrigate thousands of farms in California. Hoover Dam proved it could be done. It gave men the confidence to dam the Nile and Zambezi, the Rhine and the Yangtze. It also gave them confidence to plan dams for every single river in America.
If anybody comes in the next several thousand years from outer space and they land there, they will know exactly what happened on this spot at that time just by reading the stars.
On the edge of Hoover Dam is a mosaic star map. It shows the alignment of planets and stars in the heavens on September 30th, 1935. The day the dam was dedicated. It was designed to last thousands of years.
Anasazi Indians who farmed on the canyon floor.
More than anything else, Hoover convinced us we could conquer the fatal dryness of the great American desert.
I didn't really appreciate what this place was all about at 10 o'clock at night. I woke up in the morning and I opened the blinds and all I saw was barren desert. And I thought I'd landed on the moon.
People who live in Arizona say that they love the desert. And I think they do love it from the perspective of their air-conditioned home. If you talk to the frontier, the pioneer parties that wandered across it, trying to get someplace where they could live, where they could sustain themselves, it was the most terrifying experience imaginable. Many people died crossing the Great Basin. That emigrant trail is littered with grave sites. Everybody thinks about the Donner Party and how they died in the snow, but thousands of people died in the deserts.
When Powell first warned against oversettling the arid West, other scientists argued that rain would follow the plow, that plowing and planting would agitate the air, cause clouds to form, and rain to fall.
The frustrations that Powell dealt with once he came back was the frustration of trying to convince the Congress that the West couldn't sustain the level of population and the type of development that the Congress wanted to impose on the region. I mean, they were trying to pound a square peg into a round hole.
As pioneers went west, the first thing that had to be done was to banish the idea that this was in any sense a desert. These poor pioneers had no idea how dry it was out there. They were going into a region that couldn't be farmed without irrigation. And nobody was talking about irrigation at the time.
We grow corn or squash, melons, beans. I guess naturally we just learn how to use the water conservatively. Because we never had any water. We live in arid land, you know.
And you don't irrigate any of that?
No, we all depend on the rain. That's why we have to pray every day.
The Hopis have lived near the Colorado for 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, we like it.
On the heels of our triumph at Hoover came a time in American history when we had the money and resolve to build on a grand scale, to subdue the rivers of the West and to make them do our bidding.
The original mission of the Bureau of Reclamation to reclaim the arid West was a calling that had some real vision to it.
In 1933, there was a stamp, said conservation. It was red, and of a dam. So that was conservation then. So there was this great big rush to see how many dams we could build in this century, no matter what the consequences would be later.
The impact that large mainstream storage reservoirs had on salmon and other fishery resources was something that was recognized and then dismissed. That was the cost. That was the price that one paid for development.
Redskin fishermen from 5 tribes are mighty busy making what may be their last haul at historic Celilo Falls. Vanishing salmon for the vanishing red men. Winter food for the tribes.
Hydroelectric dams, flood-control dams, irrigation dams in California, Arizona, Montana, on the Gunnison, Green, Missouri, and 100 other rivers. Even plans to reroute the Columbia 1,000 miles south into the Colorado. Before computers, environmental impact studies, or federal deficits, we built 1,000 major dams. Over the next 30 years, we engineered dryness out of existence.
Hoover Dam, Bonneville Dam, Shasta, Grand Coulee, and then Fort Peck Dam. We were building the 5 largest structures on Earth simultaneously, all in one region of one country.
Roll on, Columbia, roll on. Roll on, Columbia, roll on. Your power.
After Hoover, we turned to the Columbia, greatest salmon river in the world. By 1955, we and the Canadians had built 55 dams on the Columbia and its tributaries.
On up the river at Grand Coulee Dam.
And Grand Coulee was so big that when engineers who worked on Hoover went up there and looked at that canyon and imagined this dam 4/5 of a mile wide and 550 feet high, they said it made Hoover look like nothing.
Inspected by Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. On a whirlwind U.S. tour, he expresses the hope that such a dam might be built in his native country.
By 1956, 90% of the salmon were gone, and almost no stretch of the Columbia was not a reservoir. Then, there was unfinished business on the Colorado.
In the 1920s, they came down in here and actually did a full trip through the Grand Canyon and identify a whole series of dams that essentially would have backed up the Colorado River in a series of stair-step reservoirs all the way from the Mexico-United States line all the way up into Wyoming and Colorado.
The Bureau began work on the dam in Glen Canyon. It would generate hydropower for Phoenix and revenue to pay for other dams, and would submerge 186 miles of canyon.
The big dam in the Colorado River, the one with the big capacity, would be Glen Canyon Dam, the 26 million acre-foot capacity reservoir, 186 miles long. That was the big one. That was the moneymaker. It wasn't for irrigation. It was just to make hydroelectric power.
Glen Canyon was one of the most remote spots in America, 100 miles from the nearest paved road. Here, Powell found the river smooth and deep, with Anasazi ruins on the banks. Barely 200 people had ever been through the canyon.
The first year I ran down Glen Canyon was in 1954. And as we come near Lee's Ferry, probably 15 or so miles above Lee's Ferry, there's marks on the wall. There's something going on over there. There's piles of dirt. I looked up, we did, and there, 600 or more feet above us, little dots, little guys, way up on top of the rim. We looked through the binoculars, and they were surveyors. I said, geez, those are surveyors. They're going to dam this canyon.
Glen Canyon, as it was. Glen Canyon, as it will be. At 11:30 on the morning of October 15th, 1956, President Dwight D. Eisenhower triggered a blast far smaller than the atomic explosions now nearly so commonplace.
Some of the rock scaling had already been done. I marveled at it because here was a sheer wall, canyon, a muddy river running through it. And I tried to visualize Hoover Dam already in place. That was what we were doing. We were building a duplicate of Hoover. It staggered me to think of the job yet to be done.
Reclamation chief was the legendary Floyd Dominy.
Floyd Dominy is a household word in the 17 western states, the reclamation area. Kennedy called me the nation's water boy. When Senator Jackson had prevailed in Utah to suggest that maybe it was time for me to retire, all I had to do was alert the White House that these people were twisting my tail and pinching a little, and it stopped. Lyndon took care of it.
He's the role model for a lot of ways that the Bureau approached things. It was more of a damn the torpedoes, let's get this son of a bitch built. And he got a lot of it built.
Remember that hydroelectric energy is the only pollution-free energy that's created. It's renewable. You don't burn up a coal mine, or you don't mine out a mine, you don't drill out a well. You don't have 25,000-year half-life full of rods from the atomic power. I think it's a shame that we haven't developed every single possible kilowatt from this renewable, non-polluting source of energy. Everyone in the Bureau of Reclamation, including Western congressmen and senators, firmly believed that the reclamation program was a must for the growth and expansion of the West. And we had no dissenters in the 40s and 50s, early 50s at least. It was everybody gung-ho, and let's get it done. The great moment on dam construction is when you finally realize that you put the last bucket of concrete on the top of the dam, and that you now are prepared to close the tunnel and let the river start making its way up to the spillway levels and fill the lake.
When Glen Canyon Dam was nearly complete, David Brower, executive director of the Sierra Club, visited the condemned canyons for the first time. Brower and the Sierra Club had stopped a dam on the Green River in exchange for not objecting to the dam in Glen Canyon.
Glen Canyon used to be filled with beavers. There's no beaver in there anymore. Good fishing in there. It was just a nice, quiet No rapids to speak of, and some very historic spots in there. It's just a nice place.
There must have been 125 to 30 canyons, each one of them with a stream in it.
But you walk up this little stream, then you turn left, and suddenly you're in one of the most remarkable places on Earth. Huge amphitheater. It's, much bigger than most of the cathedrals I've been in. Just a little slot of sky up on top. A little bit of water coming over a waterfall at the head of this.
Up to a slot of smooth sandstone that if you touched it, it just felt like velvet. And above that, a twisting funnel where the light came down first kind of yellow, then kind of dimmer, and then kind of orange.
An exquisite place, just about as beautiful as anything the Creator dreamed up.
Powell had been the first outsider to see Glen Canyon and these dozens of side canyons. Brower would be one of the last.
And at Glen Canyon, this was a critical time. And I recall the decision I had to make whether we could close the gates that year or have to wait another year.
I'd seen the canyon. I'd seen the side canyons. My family had seen them. I knew what a beautiful place it was. I testified on the lack of comprehensive thinking that had gone into the entire project and came up with very strong arguments for stopping the entire project. And I wanted, at least at the last moment, to appeal to Stuart Udall, and I wanted to get in to talk to him because that was the last day they were going to close the gates and start filling Glen Canyon. And I got to his office but never got to see him because he had this other agenda.
Of course, all the upper basin states people and politicians were saying, close the gates, close the gates. And all the downstream people who relied on the water coming on through, don't close the gates, don't close the gates.
I did have this last desperate hope that we could stay the closing of the dam, the closing of the river valves, and stop any further filling until we'd thought a little bit harder about the alternatives. And that January of '63, I failed. So Glen Canyon started filling.
We finally got an estimate that indicated and that we would get up to power plant intake levels by the end of July. And so I made the recommendation that we close the gates, start filling.
But I was the one person who was in position to stop it before they had built the dam. And there's where my big failure was. We had the arguments, we had the votes, and for reasons that I still do not understand, I didn't do what I should have done. I just sat there, and I didn't act.
And as our plane glided down into this immense canyon landscape, I could see from afar this plug in the river, the place where Glen Canyon Dam stands. As I look around at this incredibly beautiful and creative work, it occurs to me that this is a new kind of writing on the wall. A kind that says, proudly and beautifully, man was here.
We're looking down 583 feet, or 175 meters. Goodbye, Hat.
The reservoir was christened 100 years to the day after Powell passed through Glen Canyon. Glen Canyon Dam was built to generate hydropower for homes, industry, and air conditioning in Phoenix, and to power pumps which lift the Colorado 300 miles uphill to new farms and towns in Arizona. Today, 4 million people a year visit Glen Canyon Dam and its lake.
But I felt from the very start that it should be Lake Powell because Powell is the man who had made the canyon famous. He was the man who was really the father of the Bureau of Reclamation. He was the one who made the reports to Congress that indicated that the West could never be developed by enterprise alone, that it would take the power and muscle of the federal government to develop and settle the West properly. So I thought Lake Powell was the proper name for that reservoir.
One of the most outrageous things that ever happened was to name the reservoir, the flat water, behind Glen Canyon Dam after John Wesley Powell, a reservoir that flooded some of the things that he thought were the most beautiful he had ever seen. And I'm sure that if he were around, he would be after the person who thought of that idea, and we'd say, you can't do that. Maybe Dominie's Flatwater or something of the sort, but not Lake Powell.
When you dam a river, you always lose something. You can't provide something for somebody else and not have somebody in the middle get upset.
Senator Goldwater had been a strong advocate for Glen Canyon Dam.
Right, it's, I guess, probably one of the most beautiful reservoirs in the world. And as you ride on it, you can see things you could not have seen in the river. But I just as soon never see them.
Well, I went into a canyon on the left bank, and I wound around, and I came across a very narrow place where I could just barely get my boat through. And I looked back down, and the sun, at that particular moment, had come down just like a beam, right smack down into the water. And what it showed me was that spiral that I had looked up at.
There are 2,000 Anasazi sites buried in the water now. But they decided the practical advantages would outweigh that. This was a controversial dam. It kicked off the environmentalist movement in the United States because a handful of people had taken the trouble to find out what an exquisite little canyon this was.
These canyons now lie 600 feet below the surface of Lake Powell.
I have to be honest with you, I'd been happier if we didn't have the lake. Glen Canyon was a beautiful piece of water.
If you had to vote today on damming Glen Canyon, would you vote?
I'd vote against it. Because I've become convinced that, while water is important, particularly those of us who live in the desert, it's not all that important.
8 million years of geologic change came to a sudden end. Environmental havoc swiftly took hold downstream. For years, the Colorado had run 85 degrees and rich with silt. Now, from the deep reservoir, it runs freezing cold and crystal clear. Most of the native fish, which had evolved over 1 million years in the warm, silty water, vanished into extinction. Lake Powell evaporates 10 feet a year, twice what the city of Los Angeles uses in a year. The violent natural floods which redistributed river sand were replaced by a regulated daily tide, governed not by the rain, but by electric power demand in Phoenix.
Would you believe a fish story in which a transport plane is loaded with 400,000 rainbow trout in order to stock a remote lake in Arizona? At a carefully chosen altitude, 650 feet, the adult trout are ready to drop into their new home. Knocked out briefly, 95% of them survive. These flying fish may be the first successful piscatorial airdrop.
I had no sympathy for those who felt that nature couldn't be improved upon. Now, I admit that nature can improve upon man. We're probably the supreme being, but in the realm of rivers, I think man can improve upon them.
We're not trying to recreate what was here before the dam. That's kind of, I mean, that's almost impossible to do. But still trying to protect the endangered species and the culture.
40 years ago, there were no studies of the environmental change Glen Canyon Dam was set in motion. National environmental laws did not exist. Now, a Bureau team studies those changes in the river system. Powell's men found the ancient river half a mile wide at its mouth, pouring into the ocean. By 1967, Hoover Dam, Glen Canyon, and 8 other dams stopped the river in a chain of giant reservoirs. Except in very wet years, the Colorado River no longer reaches the sea. the remains of the river vanish into the sand in northern Mexico.
Many, many people have had lives and livelihoods. Cities have been built and huge amounts of food produced that just would never have happened without these reclamation projects. And I don't think anyone can truly logically sit down and say, in the grand scope of everything in context, that that was an evil thing to do. That's bullshit.
We believe that this is where we emerged. This is what we call the center of the universe. Grand Canyon is one of the most sacred place in the universe as far as the Hopis is concerned. This is very important to us. We don't want to destroy this. I know somebody mentioned it yesterday, you're trying to play God. Well, I don't know. I don't think we are able to do that because we're human, we're mortal beings. I know some of you are very, very bright and smart and, you know, but I don't think you can go beyond that.
On behalf of Airstar Helicopters and myself, I'd like to welcome you to the Grand Canyon.
Bienvenue à bord de l'hélicoptère d'Airstar, tour du spectaculaire Grand Canyon.
The Little Colorado River flows down through there. The Colorado River flows down the canyon up to our left front. They come together right in front of us at a place called the Confluence.
To the Hopi, the confluence of the Colorado and the Little Colorado marks the place where humans first emerged from the earth ages ago.
The Grand Canyon is, I guess, 9 million years old. If you take a ballpoint pen and just draw a line across a piece of paper, that's the amount of erosion that it took every year for 9 million years to make the Grand Canyon.
On the very day Glen Canyon began to fill, the Bureau announced plans for more power dams on the Colorado, including one in Marble Canyon, not far from the confluence.
The Marble Canyon Dam was a wonderful dam site. Sheer canyon walls over 1,000 feet, straight up and down, as near perpendicular as you could get, and a very narrow canyon. So it was a perfect dam site.
Well, Marble Gorge is a remarkable slot, and the Colorado River is entrenched itself very deep in their very steep walls. There are places where the river has polished that marble gloriously.
You have entered and are well into the Red Wall Limestone Formation, place they finally decided to build the so-called Marble Dam. And they had a big operation there. A regular community was formed in the vicinity. They had an aerial tramway that came down from the canyon rim. They had to test the rock, and in order to do that, they dug tunnels into it. So they began testing the cliffs there, the rock for its strength.
These new dams would flood 140 miles of canyon between Hoover and Glen. They were the centerpiece of an immense plan to generate more power for growing cities.
Having lost Glen Canyon and realizing how great a loss that was for all time, I just had a new determination, well, let's not do this anymore, and certainly not the Grand Canyon. So we began to do what we could to block the attempts of the Bureau of Reclamation to build the two Grand Canyon dams.
Now, a big smile.
The Grand Canyon is so deep that tourists on the rim cannot see the river. Brower testified before Congress that the dams would be wasteful and impractical.
His big question is, well, wouldn't you compromise? Wouldn't you take just a little teeny-weeny dam in the Grand Canyon? And I said, no, the Grand Canyon wasn't mine to trade off.
Permanent, massive things that would have altered it forever. So we had to stop it, and it wasn't easy.
They didn't want any dams built any place on the Colorado River. It's not hard for me to understand that.
Senator Goldwater represented the interests of Arizona voters.
I don't like to see these dams built. I wish there was some way we didn't have to build them. But speaking for people who are mounting by the millions, and I expect to live to see the day when my city will be the 5th or 6th largest in America, I have to argue for these people.
Commissioner Dominy pointed out that reservoirs would not be seen from any vista point on the canyon rim, and that Marble Canyon filled with water would be more accessible to tourists than power boats.
Should we flood the Sistine Chapel so tourists can get closer to the ceiling? Now, you know, that was in response to the members of Congress from Arizona and all who said, we will make a beautiful lake there so people can see the scenery better.
So we ran ads in the New York Times, the Chronicle, the Los Angeles Times, the Sacramento Bee. We ran ads all over the Washington Post, wherever we thought it would work. Americans got tired of the idea that dams were conservation. The engineer's argument that you can't waste this water, you can't let it flow to the sea unused, had just began to pale on the public. So it was not that hard to say, well, let's consider that we have enough dams for now, and let's see if we can't keep some rivers alive.
The dams would rise like bookends on either side of Grand Canyon National Park, technically outside the park boundary, but Brower argued they would still affect the Grand Canyon.
I resent the fact that Dave Brower deliberately misled the public about Bridge Canyon Dam.
Floyd Dominy is still, to this day, figured that all I did was tell untruths about what was going to happen to the Grand Canyon.
He gave the impression deliberately that we were going to flood the Grand Canyon National Park. There was actual tourists would say, where would the lake be in this view?
We used the Bureau of Reclamation's photographs of how much would be inundated.
It was an absolute lie, and Brower knew it. So that sanctimonious bastard deliberately lied.
We talked about damming the Grand Canyon. That changed everything. The Grand Canyon. The Reader's Digest said it was a bad idea. My Weekly Reader said it was a bad idea, terrible idea. And the beast was out of the bottle.
I have no apologies. I was a crusader for the development of water. I was the Messiah. I was the evangelist that went out and argued persuasively to develop our rivers and water supplies for the benefit of people. I don't apologize for that.
As public opinion swelled, Commissioner Dominy held out for at least one dam.
We came very close to building that structure. The site was selected. The general feasibility studies were prepared. That dam was nearly a reality. I think the story goes that once Floyd Dominy went overseas in an inspection, and it wasn't until he left the country that people then immediately huddled and came to agreement not to include those structures in the final legislation.
The dams were taken out of the authorization bill. He had to be gone for that to happen. That was such a historic moment. Nobody knew it at the time, but that really, it was the beginning, and it was a big beginning of the end of the age of dams.
We've just come into what's called the Marble Canyon Dam Site area, and in the late 50s, early 60s, this area was actually proposed for a dam, and this was one of the dam sites that was being explored. There's adit tunnels on both river right and river left, and that's primarily where you see the mine tailings. On river right, you can see a couple of Bureau of Reclamation graffiti signs. The one that's straight across from us is B. The middle of the dam was to be located.
A living river is a very exciting thing. It should remain an exciting thing. The river has done a very good job in the Grand Canyon. It's made a beautiful canyon, and I'm not ready to penalize the river to please a couple of hydroelectric engineers, ever.
Brower had won. Glen Canyon was the last dam built on the Colorado. But saving Marble Canyon did not stop the flood of people drawn to new homes and new jobs in Arizona. In 1969, Lyndon Johnson authorized the Central Arizona Project.
For the millions of Americans west of the Continental Divide, it'll provide more water for growing cities. It'll provide more water for expanding industries, for the farmers' crops, and for the ranchers' cattle. It'll let us build aqueducts and power plants and a network of projects for irrigation, for community water supplies, for flood control, for electricity, and finally for recreation. So by taking this action today, that we are making the waters of the West a little sweeter, and we'll make the grass of the West a good deal greener.
This is the most expensive waterworks in Bureau history, the lifeline without which jobs, farms, and homes in central Arizona could not exist. Glen Canyon Power and a giant coal-fired power plant drive pumps which lift the Colorado 300 miles uphill into Phoenix, Tucson, and Scottsdale. Phoenix has grown so large that Paris, Rome, and Manhattan together could all fit within its city limits.
This is our Cambria 2 model. This is the home that we do in this particular community. It's about 1,600 square feet. The next room I want to show you is our 3rd bedroom or den. Right now, I wanted to let you know that Arizona is about the 2nd hottest real estate market in the country next to Atlanta.
Well, the only thing that can get out of balance is if we get too many people. As I say, when I was born here, there were about 10,000 people living in the whole valley. Now there are 2 million. 2 million is a rather large number of people for us to service with water.
The things that reclamation did in building water projects allowed a lot of growth. But the problem we face today is that there's just not enough water to go around.
We have underground watering systems with a small drain to every plant, a small drip system. We also have sprayer systems for the grassy areas. Now, of course, this is called desert landscaping.
And my grandmother would go over there and fetch water, very little. And that expected to last maybe for a couple of days. And then when I see my grandmother wash dishes after dinner, she put water into 1 cup. She put her hand in like that, and she put that same water into another cup. And then she finally throw it out. And that's how she uses water, because the water has to last a long time. The reason why we live in this desolate area is because it's harsh. And that's the only way that you can be as close to the spiritual being. And the closer you are to the spiritual being, the more that you will maintain your humbleness. So we look at this survival in terms of maybe thousands of years in the future.
As you can see right now, we're lucky. The fountain's going off right through the trees over here. Now that goes off every hour on the hour. That fountain shoots up over 500 feet. It's actually taller than the Washington Monument.
There will never be enough water in the Colorado River to satisfy all the demand on it, ever. We will never augment it by relocating another river from the northwest to make it bigger. And when the pie doesn't grow, you just cut smaller pieces of pie.
Perhaps we've created some problems that we'll never solve, and by attracting people, making it easier for people to move into a harsh environment. I don't know why everybody should have a swimming pool in their own backyard. I don't know why they should have a green lawn when cactus would look better in a desert environment.
I can sit here in 1995 and I can say to John Wesley Powell, you were wrong. The Colorado River at that time was a whole different river system. And it was running wild, and it didn't look very manageable. But we've engineered our way out of that problem. We have put so many dams and reservoirs on that system that there is adequate water in the Colorado River.
But the system is fragile. When runoff predictions went awry in 1983, thundering water ripped boulders and pulverized rock from Glen Canyon's spillway tunnels.
Glen Canyon, they almost lost it when they were a little chintzy. I don't want the dam to go all at once. It was take out Hoover, Parker, and Davis downstream because they're not built to handle 26 million acre feet of water coming down all at once.
If Hoover Dam collapsed, the entire economy of the Southwest would be catastrophically affected. We can't imagine until something like this happens how dependent we've become on the liberties we've taken with the natural order.
We have turned nature on its head. In Phoenix, the average August temperature is over 100. Here and there amidst the abundance are a few abandoned orange groves and subdivisions, their supply of Colorado water shut off. This is what happens when the water stops. Today, more people, farms, and industries depend on the Colorado than on any comparable river in the world. Never has such a river been asked to do so much.
Next on Cadillac Desert.
Everybody is conscious of water. If you head for the river with an empty bucket, you'll liable to get shot.
The theory was that if any water reached the ocean, it was wasted. And so you had to grab it and put it somewhere else.